Day 1 by Andrew Harwood. First published in 2026 by the Newman Files Limited. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved. The battered old Land Rover Defender travelled down North Woolwich Road in the Docklands area of East London. The windscreen wipers were protesting after many years of service and well overdue for retirement. The heater was struggling to produce anything more than a fraction above cold. "I still don't like this part of town," Mike Harrington said. Clara Mills, who was sitting beside him, smiled. "Says the man who comes from Brixton." "Exactly. This area makes Brixton look like Beverly Hills." Clara, from the passenger seat, just laughed. She was 30 years old, average height, average weight, short brunette hair in a bob. Jeans, light grey jumper under a warm puffer jacket. She still looked uncomfortable, out of uniform. An ex-Naval Intelligence junior officer, discharged following the fallout of Operation White Knight. The mission had not gone well. In fact, as Mike had so eloquently put it, a real shit show. Both he and Andrew Newman had also left their respective roles in the SAS and SBS because of the loss of so many team members, the result of poor decisions from bureaucrats, politicians, and hostile actors. "So why does Drew want us here?" Clara asked quietly. "You know Drew." He shrugged. "Just said he has something to show us." He turned and smiled at her. "I think it must be serious. I heard him put the kettle on." "Well, at least there will be tea. I am famished," she said, smiling. "With Drew, that is guaranteed." They both laughed as the Land Rover complained under braking, and Mike stopped at the junction with Factory Road. The whole industrial area that used to make up Docklands was a mixture of new builds, cleared demolition sites, and old condemned warehouses. It was Sunday, and the roads were deserted. Mike drove straight across Factory Road in between some very depressed-looking warehouses that would have been used at one time to stock all manner of goods being taken off ships that made their way up the Thames. "The coordinates he gave me are down here," he said. Mike was 39 years old, a former SAS captain. Built like a brick outhouse with opinions. Graduated Sandhurst as the only black officer in his cohort. He had been battling bigotry his entire life. He wore it like armour. He had met Drew Newman in 2008, when Drew, a colour sergeant leading a troop of fresh-faced rookie Royal Marines, had rescued Mike and his SAS team from a dire situation in Algiers. Mike had persuaded Drew to join the SBS, and they had been close friends for over 10 years. He crossed Factory Road and slowly headed past a row of warehouses and factory units. In the distance he could see a well-dressed man waving frantically at them. "That's Razz. I thought he might be here," Mike said. "Who's Razz?" Clara asked. "Drew's friend from Eton. Has a number of hidden talents. Subtlety is not one of them. Chaos personified, but good company to have around. Don't ever tell him I said that." Clara laughed. "Oh, he is that friend." "Exactly." Razz was waving like an over-enthusiastic member of ground crew as he guided Mike and his Land Rover in through some large roller-shutter doors into a vast, practically empty warehouse space. Drew was leaning against a cluster of desks, drinking from a large mug, smiling. The Land Rover came to a halt next to a Bentley and an Aston Martin. Mike and Clara got out. Clara rushed over and gave Drew a massive, affectionate hug. "Hey, Clara," Drew said, smiling. She held on a minute longer before stepping back. "Hey yourself. Now please explain why I am here early on a Sunday morning when I am supposed to be enjoying early retirement." Mike walked past and headed for the kettle. "Yes, come on, bootneck. Why have you dragged me to this part of town?" Razz joined the group. Yes, mate, I am feeling overdressed, and so is my Bentley. He then turned to Clara and held out his hand. Where are my manners? You must be Clara. I am Razz. I am responsible for morale and snacks. He gave her his patented smile. Drew tells me you are the best intelligence officer he has ever known. That is high praise from him. Clara took his hand and blushed a little. Thank you, I think. Unfortunately, Drew has failed to mention you to me. Razz looked at Clara and then turned to Drew. Wounded, mate, wounded. Drew smiled. I am sure you will get over it, Razz. Mike returned with several mugs of tea, handing them to Clara and Razz. He then opened a tin marked baking soda. I see Eleanor still insists on hiding the shortbread where everyone knows what it is. She made a fresh batch just for us and sends her regards, Drew said. She also said good luck. I think she meant that for Razz. They all laughed and dunked shortbread, standing in the middle of a giant empty warehouse as if this was normal for a Sunday morning. Finally, Drew cleared his throat. He looked at Mike. After White Night, we both said we'd had enough of working for people in suits, sitting in rooms, deciding who was or wasn't an acceptable loss. Mike nodded. We did. Well, Drew said, I think we can build something better. He took another sip of tea. Mike looked stunned, but before he could answer, Drew turned to Clara. Clara, I need you to make sure we never lose anyone because of bad intel. Clara's eyes started to water. She just nodded. Drew turned to Razz. And Razz, I understand you have an associate with a problem. His daughter was taken 48 hours ago, Razz said. The humour disappeared from the warehouse. Drew put down his mug. Where? Nafplion, Greece. And where is she now? Razz looked towards Clara. That, he said, is apparently what we need to find out. Razz produced a laptop from the Bentley, along with a satellite hotspot and a bottle of something he described as for afterwards, whichever way it goes. He set the laptop on the nearest desk and made a call that was answered on the first ring. The man on the screen was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing an open-collared shirt that probably cost more than Mike's Land Rover. He had the deep tan of a man who spent his life between Athens and London, and the grey face of a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. The two didn't sit well together. Alexandros Vasilis, Razz said quietly. Shipping, ports, infrastructure. We've known each other through. Let's call them finance and gambling circles. Which is Razz's way of saying he owes me money, Vasilis said. There was no humour in it. It was just something his mouth did while his eyes stayed somewhere else. You are the people Razz trusts. We're the people who are going to find your daughter, Drew said. Tell us everything, from the beginning. Leave nothing out, Vasilis told them. Elena Vasilis, 27, an architect specialising in heritage restoration. She had been working on a conservation project in Nafplion and had left a site meeting on Friday evening. She never arrived at her apartment. On Saturday morning, her father received a video, a demand, and a set of rules. He shared his screen and played the video. 11 seconds. A young woman with dark hair sat on a plastic chair in a dim stone room, holding Friday's edition of Catamarini. Her wrists were bound with cable ties. She looked frightened, and underneath the fear there was something else that Clara noticed and filed away. She looked furious. The demand is 5 million euros, Vasilis said. Delivered by a representative. Not me, not police, not Greek authorities of any kind. If police are involved, they say they will know, and I believe them. The exchange is Wednesday before dawn. The location comes 12 hours before. My representative travels to Nafplion and waits. 5 million, Mike said. You can pay that? I would pay 10 times that. Then something's wrong, Clara said. Everyone looked at her. She was leaning towards the screen, frowning at the frozen final frame of the video. Kidnap for ransom follows economics. You price the victim at what the family can raise quickly, and you make the exchange as simple as possible, because complexity kills hostages and gets kidnappers caught. 5 million is too low for your daughter, Mr. Vasilis, and a fixed handover with a staged location reveal is too complicated for money. This is choreography. They want you managed, not paid. She looked up. What else did they ask for? The pause before Vasilis answered was a quarter of a second too long. Nothing, he said. Only the money. Clara didn't push. She simply glanced at Drew, and Drew gave the smallest of nods, and something invisible passed between them that would one day have a department named after it. The call ended with logistics and reassurances. Razz closed the laptop. Right, Mike said. He put his mug down with the air of a man about to conduct a demolition. Let's take stock. We have no company, no licenses, no insurance, no support team, no communications beyond our phones, no weapons we can legally carry through Greek customs, no medical cover, and no extraction platform. What we have is 4 people standing in an empty warehouse eating shortbread. He looked around the group. I've watched capable people die because they went in without infrastructure. I'm not against this. I'm telling you what it is. You're right, Drew said, on every point. Good. We're going anyway. Mike closed his eyes briefly. We have no people, no equipment, and no support structure. Then we acquire them. By tomorrow, preferably before. Razz smiled and reached for his phone. Now you're speaking my language. They flew out of Biggin Hill on Monday morning in a Cessna Citation that Razz had borrowed from a man he declined to name, on terms he declined to describe. Mike spent the flight reading the aircraft's registration documents with an expression of deepening theological concern, and eventually decided he was happier not knowing. Nafplion in late autumn was doing what Nafplion does. The Palamidi fortress stood 1,000 steps above the town, catching the morning light. Below it, the old town tumbled towards the harbour, tiled roofs, narrow Venetian streets, balconies dripping with bougainvillea that hadn't been told the season was over. Cafes lined the waterfront, half full of the last determined tourists, and out in the harbour, a few hundred metres offshore, sat the Borzi, a small Venetian fortress on its own islet, honey-coloured stone rising straight out of the water, serene as a postcard. Clara stood on the quay and looked at it for a long time. Pretty, Mike said. It's wrapped, she said. Look at the seaward side. Scaffolding, tarpaulins, a site generator. It's closed for restoration. She turned away, and the thought went into the same file as Elena Vasilis's furious eyes. They divided the town the way they would divide everything for the next 7 years. Razz installed himself in the Grande Bretagne on the waterfront, took the corner room with the best view of the harbour, ordered champagne he barely touched, and began talking to everyone, waiters, receptionists, boat owners, the man who ran the kiosk by the harbour taxis. By evening, half of Nafplion knew there was a charming, wealthy English idiot in town, representing a worried Greek family, which was exactly what the kidnappers' watchers were meant to see, and precisely what Razz wanted them to report. Mike went to work with Nico, a compact, unhurried Greek whom Razz introduced as an old associate. Don't ask him about the 2015 yacht business, he gets emotional. Nico could apparently source anything on the Argolic coast, and by nightfall Mike had handguns, radios, a rented fishing boat with an engine far too good for its paint work, 2 sets of diving equipment of respectable vintage, charts of the harbour, and a growing respect for Razz's address book that he was careful to keep off his face. Drew met Alexandros Vasilis at a villa above Tolo, and spent 2 hours listening to a man describe his daughter, her stubbornness, her brilliance, the arguments they'd had about the business, the fact that she had chosen restoring old buildings over inheriting his fleet. Drew listened the way he did everything, completely, and when he left, he was certain of 2 things. The first was that Vasilis loved his daughter beyond any calculation of money. The second was that he was still lying. Clara stayed in the hotel suite with headphones on and played 11 seconds of video 400 times. At 2 a.m, she stood at the window, looking at the dark harbour, and phoned Drew. "She's on the Bortsy," Clara said, "or she was when they filmed it." "Tell me." 3 things. Behind her the wall is Venetian ashlar with a repair line in modern lime mortar. That's active conservation work, and the stone matches the Bortsy's documented restoration, which I found in a heritage bulletin Elena's own firm contributed to. Second, at 6 seconds there's a light flicker on the ceiling vault, not electrical. It's water reflection. Moving water close under a window. Third, the audio. Everyone hears her breathing. Under it, there's a generator, small marine diesel, and at 9 seconds, very faint, bells. I matched them to a recording of the evening bells from the old town churches. The delay and the softness put the microphone across open water, 300 to 500 meters from the waterfront. She paused. Everyone else sees a frightened woman in a room, Drew. It's a location. It's that location. There was a silence on the line that she would learn over the years. Meant Drew Newman was smiling. "White Night would have gone differently if they had listened to you," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "It would." Tuesday was spent proving her right, because Drew had buried too many people on the strength of a single source. Nico drank coffee with a cousin who worked for the Port Authority and learned that the Bortsy's restoration had stopped and started twice that year, and that 6 weeks ago the original maintenance crew had been replaced by a subcontractor nobody local had heard of, with paperwork that was too clean, and a site manager who paid cash. Razz took the harbour master to a very long lunch and returned with the information that an unregistered launch had been making night runs to the fortress, always after 2, always dark. Logged by nobody, because the harbour master had been politely paid not to keep a log. "He's a lovely man," Razz reported. "Deeply corrupt, but in a warm, family-oriented way. He is now equally corrupt on our behalf, and considerably better paid." Mike sat in a cafe with a long lens and photographed the contractors coming off the fortress supply boat. Most of them moved like builders. One of them moved like a soldier, trying to move like a builder, weight balanced, eyes cycling, back never to the water. When he passed a stack of scaffolding poles that clattered in the wind, his hand went to his hip, to equipment that wasn't there, or was. "Ex-military," Mike said that evening, spreading the photographs across the bed in Razz's suite. "Private contractor written all over him, which means the rest of the builders are the same, which means this isn't a local kidnap gang. These are professionals hired by someone with money, holding an exchange site they've dressed as a construction project. And professionals don't do vague objectives." He looked at Drew. €5 million doesn't buy this crew's exposure. Clara's right. The money's set dressing. Drew nodded slowly. Then he drove to Tolo. He found Vasilis on the terrace with an untouched drink, and he didn't sit down. "Wednesday morning, 4 people are going to risk their lives for your daughter," Drew said. "So you are going to tell me what the kidnappers actually asked for. Not the version for the police you didn't call. The truth." Vasilis stared at him for a long moment. Then he seemed to fold all at once, like something with the load-bearing wall removed. "A drive," he said quietly. "A secure digital drive. They want it delivered inside the ransom case." He rubbed his face. Last year I was in negotiations to acquire a smaller shipping line. During due diligence, my people found irregularities, a covert network inside their operations, vessels making unmanifested calls, sanctioned cargo moving through the eastern Mediterranean under clean paperwork. Weapons, Mr. Newman. Possibly people. I copied the data. And reported it to whom? The silence answered. Leverage, Drew said. You kept it as leverage. I kept it as insurance. You kept evidence of an arms network for your own advantage, and the people running that network found out, and now they have your daughter. Drew's voice never rose. That was somehow worse. I've stood in rooms where men withheld intelligence because it was inconvenient, or embarrassing, or valuable. I've carried the results home in flag-draped boxes. You hired us to recover your daughter. Yes, then perhaps stop helping the people who took her. Vasilis gave him the drive that night. Clara spent the next several hours with it, and what she found changed the shape of the problem entirely. The network's traffic didn't end with the company Vasilis had investigated. It routed through ports his own vessels serviced, under credentials only a handful of officials could grant. Somewhere above the kidnappers was a name, and the kidnapper's employer needed the drive back not to hide a crime, but to hide himself. They won't release her, Clara said flatly. The moment they verify the drive, Elena is a witness and her father is a loose end. The exchange isn't an exchange, it's a tidy-up. Then we untidy it, Drew said. They built it on the bed of Razz's suite, on a harbour chart weighted down with room service plates. The location reveal came an hour ago, Razz said. As predicted, the Bortzi. My instructions are 1 boat, 1 man, 1 case, 4 a.m. They chose it because every approach can be watched, nobody arrives without a boat, and they can see the whole harbour from the walls. They think it makes rescue impossible. It's a fortress on an islet with 1 watched landing, Mike said. Approaches covered, elevation, hard stone. As a defensive position, it's excellent. He glanced at Drew. Against anyone who arrives on the surface. Drew almost smiled. Nobody watches the water below the waterline. The plan, in the end, was simple enough to survive contact. Razz would do what Razz did. Arrive visibly, carrying €5 million, and the drive, being loud and rich and harmless. Clara would run the night from the hotel. Radios, the harbour master's cameras, a scanner Nico had acquired from a source best left unexamined, and would be the only one of them who could see the whole board. Drew and Mike would go into the water off Nico's fishing boat at 3, swim the last 600 metres, and come up inside the scaffolding on the seaward face, where the tarpaulins had been snapping in the wind for 6 weeks and no longer attracted anyone's attention. Nico would idle offshore as extraction, and at 3:50 a.m. an anonymous call in fluent Greek would inform the Nafplion police of suspicious activity at a boatyard 2 kilometres up the coast, the spot Clara had identified as the kidnappers' secondary escape point. Not the fortress, just the back door, quietly locked with lights and sirens. Rules, Drew said at the end. Elena comes first. Before the drive, before the money, before anyone's pride. If it comes to a choice, there is no choice. Nobody is expendable. He looked around the 3 of them in the lamplight. That's the difference between us and the people who used to dictate our missions. Everyone clear? Everyone was clear. Then get some sleep, Drew said. Tomorrow's a working day. The water of the Argolic Gulf in the small hours was black glass, and cold enough to make a man grateful for every year of SBS conditioning. Drew and Mike slipped over the gunwale of Nico's boat without a splash and swam the last 600 metres on a compass bearing, navigating by the dim glow of the site generator's work lamp above the fortress landing. They surfaced inside the scaffolding at 0341. in the black shadow of a tarpaulin that cracked and boomed in the wind, covering every sound they made. Mike's hand found the ladder bolted to the seaward wall. 6 weeks of night runs and paid-off officials had made the kidnappers confident, and confidence makes men watch the things they expect. They were watching the harbour. Nobody was watching the sea. At 3:58, Razz arrived. He came across the harbour standing up in the launch like Washington crossing the Delaware, if Washington had worn a camel-hair coat and greeted armed men as though they were valet parking. 2 kidnappers met him at the landing. Razz talked. He talked about the crossing, the cold, the case, the frankly disappointing quality of the coffee at 4 in the morning, the restoration. Venetian, isn't it? Marvellous. You've done wonders with the scaffolding, until the lead kidnapper, a broad Serb with a contractor's tan and a soldier's eyes, told him in English to shut up, which was what Razz was waiting for. Because a man who tells you to shut up is irritated, and an irritated man is readable, and this one had glanced twice, at the North Tower. North Tower, Razz murmured, apparently to himself, into the microphone under his lapel. Copy, Clara said, from a dark hotel room 400 metres away. And then sharply, all stations, second boat, repeat, second vessel entering the harbour from the east, running dark, 6+ aboard. That's not theirs, and it's not ours. A pause while the scanner crackled. Encrypted traffic. Drew, the employer didn't trust his contractors. He sent his own people to collect the drive and clean the site. Inside the fortress, Drew moved through unfinished rooms by torchlight the colour of a dying ember. Construction dust, cement bags, coils of cable, Venetian stone 600 years old under plastic sheeting. He found the North Tower stairs and went up them the way water goes downhill, silently, filling every space. Elena Vasilis was in the upper room, cable tied to a scaffolding upright, and Drew's first sight of her was in perfect keeping with everything Clara had deduced. She had already worked one hand free against the raw edge of a stone repair, and the guard sent to check on her was sitting on the floor holding his temple, having discovered that architects who work heritage sites carry lump hammers, and that this one had kept hers in her jacket when they took her. "You're late," she whispered when Drew put a finger to his lips. "Traffic was murder," Drew said, cutting the remaining ties. Down at the landing, everything came apart at once, as everything always does. The Serb's radio spat a warning from the second boat, and his face changed as somebody, somewhere, told him the drive he was about to receive had been read, accessed hours earlier, imaged, its tamper log blinking like a lighthouse. The handover was dead before the case was open. The Serb drew his weapon, and Razz, nervous, rich, harmless Razz, flicked the catches and swung the case up one-handed, and €5 million in banded notes and a secure drive took the man full in the face, while the reinforced lid stopped the round from his partner's pistol. Razz went down behind a generator, apparently by accident, into the only piece of cover on the landing, howling about his coat. "Chaos initiated," Clara said dryly. "Mike, the reinforcements making for the landing. Drew, your extraction ladder is blown. 2 hostiles on the seaward wall. Stand by." A heartbeat while she read the board that only she could see. "Drew, down the stair, left through the magazine. It's unlit and roofed. They can't overwatch it. Cistern passage to the western gun platform. Nico, come around the west side now." Mike met the reinforcement at the top of the landing steps in the dark, and it was short and quiet, and afterwards 2 men from the second boat were in the water, and a third was regretting the whole voyage. Drew took Elena down through the confined stone passages the restoration crews had been shoring for months. No gun battle, no heroics, just close, brutal, economical work in spaces too narrow for anyone to bring numbers to bear. 1 man at the magazine door and one at the cistern, who both went down before they understood the fight had started. At the western platform, Drew put Elena over the parapet onto the rocks where Nico's boat was standing in, and turned, and there it was, the choice. Below him on the landing, in the generator light, a tall silver-haired man from the second boat was walking calmly through the shouting with the recovered drive in his hand. Not a contractor, the employer's man, or the employer. Drew had a clear, fast route down. 15 seconds and he could have him, and the name, and the network, and the whole rotten pipeline behind future work yet to come. And on the rocks below, a round cracked off the stone, a metre from Elena's head, as one of the surviving contractors found an angle. It wasn't even close to a decision. That was the thing he would remember. It never even slowed him down. Drew went over the parapet, put his body between the shooter and Elena Vasilis, and took her into the water, and the silver-haired man walked onto his dark boat with the drive and sailed out of the story. Behind them, up the coast, the night bloomed blue with the lights of the Nafplion police, arriving in force at a boatyard where the kidnappers' escape vehicles, documents, and 2 very surprised drivers were waiting to be discovered. Nico hauled them aboard one by one. Eleanor, Drew, and Mike. Razz came last, dripping, clutching the sodden ransom case, and lay on the deck looking up at the stars. "The coat," he said, "was Savile Row." "Send the kidnappers an invoice," Mike said. Elena Vasilis sat wrapped in a blanket, shaking with cold and adrenaline, looking back at the fortress she had once studied in conservation drawings. Then she looked around at the 4 of them. "Who are you people?" she asked. There was a pause. "That's still in committee," Drew said. The warehouse was still mostly empty the following Sunday, although someone had delivered 4 more desks and a second-hand filing cabinet, and the kettle had been joined by a toaster of uncertain provenance. Elena was safe, home, and, according to Razz, already arguing with her father about everything, which everyone agreed was the best possible sign. Alexandros Vasilis had paid them considerably more than the agreed fee, partly from gratitude, and partly, they all understood, to ensure discretion. He had also, at Drew's quiet insistence, begun a conversation with certain authorities about certain shipping irregularities on terms that protected his daughter. Mike looked at the bank transfer confirmation for a long moment. That should cover the kettle. Possibly the electricity as well, Clara said. There was one more thing, and Drew chose his moment, which was his way. He waited until Mike and Razz were arguing about desk allocation and set a cup of tea beside Clara's laptop. "The drive went back to its owners," he said conversationally. "It did," Clara said, not looking up, "along with its tamper log, showing it had been imaged." "Careless of someone," Clara said. Drew looked at her. She looked at him. The copy sat where she had put it, encrypted, patient, waiting for the day the silver-haired man's name would surface again, and neither of them said anything, then or ever, because some things between intelligence officers do not require saying. The client had paid for a rescue. He had not purchased the truth. Then the 4 of them sat on packing crates and desks and worked out, over tea, everything they would need before they did this again. Proper communications, a medical capability, vetted operators, aircraft and maritime partners, legal structure, insurance, training facilities, an intelligence architecture worthy of the woman who had found a hostage in 11 seconds of video. The list grew long, and the light outside faded, and none of it felt like a corporate plan. It felt like people building somewhere to belong. "So," Razz said finally, feet up on a crate, "what are we calling it?" Drew looked at Mike. Mike looked at Clara. Clara opened the tin marked baking soda and discovered one remaining piece of shortbread, which she broke with great ceremony into 4. We have 8 desks, 1 elderly Land Rover and no working lavatories, Mike said. Perhaps branding can wait until Monday. Drew lifted his mug. Monday then. It was not Monday. It was day 1. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. I'm building a thriller universe called the Thompson-Newman Files, and there are many more stories still to come. Until next time, remember, tea before tactics.